It's wonderful to have Angelo Kalevela join me today. So a lot of you might know him as Angelo the BA, and he's got amazing short videos explaining business analysis, explaining UX and all kinds of things. So before we go into too much detail, maybe Angelo, if you could tell us a little bit about you and who you are and what makes you tick.
Sure. I am Angelo the BA, Angelo Kalevela, depending on where you're looking for me. I've been a business analyst or in this space for 14 years now. I now manage a team of business analysts. In that journey, I found UX along the way, and it was something that I realized that I was really passionate about. So I wanted to incorporate it as much as possible into the roles and the projects that I was on. So I ended up getting my master's degree in user experience design about 4 years into my career, or I guess I finished it about 6 years into my career. And ever since, I've been just trying to mesh those two things together. What makes me tick is getting good at stuff. And so it really doesn't matter what it is, as long as I feel like I'm progressing and getting better and building a skill set, that is what is behind everything that makes me tick.
Congratulations, by the way, on your master's. I know that must be quite tough doing that and working at the same time. So, congratulations on that. So, why the two together? Because that's quite an unusual blend. Well, I know that they're related, but most people either choose one or the other. So, why would you?
For me, it was an easy choice. So actually, what actually happened is on the first project that I got to be a part of in my career, I wasn't a user experience designer, but we had a consulting company who was doing the UX for us. And I just really loved what they were doing. Prior to starting my career, I was a pretty artistic person. At some point growing up, graphic design was something that I was considering as a career path. But then I shied away from kind of the artistic path because, like everybody else, I wanted to make money, or at least that's what I thought. That's the path I thought I needed to go. And so when I saw what they were doing, I was like, wow, that's so cool. I love what they're doing. And to me, it just felt like when you're doing business analysis work, you're divining essentially what needs to be done, and then you're letting somebody else design it. So to me, it was like I'm doing one step and then I'm going to go ahead and do the next step too. So it wasn't that I was doing two different jobs. I was essentially just extending my range of responsibility to take it a little bit further down. And the company that I worked for at the time, we didn't really have an in-house UX team. So unless we had a UX consulting company working with us, nobody was really thinking about it that much. So it was easy to say, hey, if you put me in there, I'm going to think about it for you and I'll be passionate about it. So to me, it was a pretty easy choice. Like as soon as I saw it, I was like, I want more of that in my life.
Good. I can understand that because that design bit and being able to truly solve the problem all the way to the end must be, yeah, I get it. I think it makes sense. You've also done heaps of YouTube videos and that. I actually share some of yours with our learners, especially the one, what type of BA are you? Where you spoke about the philosopher and the note taker and those kind of things. So, firstly, how do you have the time to do that? And then secondly, what was the inspiration behind your YouTube channel?
Sure. Having the time is tough now. When I started it, I had a little bit more time since I've started it. I've had two kids and they're still quite young, so I don't have time like I used to. So if you look at the gap between my videos, it's gotten quite large over time, but it's also a profession that doesn't change a ton over
Mhm.
time. So a lot of the videos stay true. What really got me started into it, interestingly enough, is it really started with me getting my certification, my BA certification. One thing that, looking back at how I was in school, like when you're taking a course, you do everything you can to pass the final, but once that final is done, you're like, there goes all that knowledge on to the next thing. And I studied really hard for that certification, so I felt like I was in school again. And then I was like, I don't want it to be just like school, where after I pass the test, I just purge it all. So I was like, okay, how do I make sure that I keep the knowledge fresh, that I'm challenging that information? And I actually started with the blog. So I was just writing a blog, writing articles about things I found interesting or ways I considered doing the job. And I would just post them to BA groups and LinkedIn with the idea that if I post it to a bunch of BAs. They're going to challenge it, and they're going to help me grow, because people are very bold on the internet and they'll tell you you're wrong right away. So I was like, this is the best way to grow, to put stuff out there, put information out there, let people challenge me, people more, because I was still quite young in my career when I got my certification. So the assumption was more senior people would challenge the things I said, help me grow, help me think about my career a little bit differently. And then along the way, I enjoyed doing the blogging thing. And I thought I wanted to expand my audience. I was like, how do I expand my audience? And at the time, I was like, oh, I should use YouTube as a mechanism to advertise my blog. And so I would make really short snippet of videos and just point people back to my blog. And that was where it started. But I only had a few, like maybe 5 in the beginning, with the express purpose of getting people back to my blog. And I hadn't even considered things like monetization and things like that, because I didn't assume it was going to be the type of blog that would ever earn anything. So it wasn't even in my radar. And then in 2018, I was just looking at the analytics of my YouTube channel, which I realized I had never done before in the 5 years that it existed. And there was like some activity with like, I guess at that time it just automatically monetized you. I don't know. And so there was some activity there, and I was like, wow. And it was like $1 or something like that. But like the fact that I didn't know and it was happening, I was like, wow, that's cool. I never really thought about this avenue. Like maybe instead of just focusing on the blog, I should also put some effort on the actual YouTube channel itself. And that same month when I noticed, and maybe I got a notification and that's why I even went to go look, YouTube changed the policy on video monetization, and it basically had to have a certain amount of subscribers or hours viewed, and I did not meet the threshold. So I was like, the month I find out that this could be a money-making thing and I'm making a couple of dollars a month, I got shut down. So I was like, okay, I have 500 subscribers. I need to be at 1,000. I didn't even try to get these 500. Maybe I should try to put out some content so people actually subscribe and I get those numbers up. So for about a year, I set a challenge for myself to post at least a new video every 2 weeks, and I did it pretty consistently. I don't think I missed it for that first year. And by the end of the year, I had met the threshold to get monetized. And one of the things you realize when you are trying to get your audience up is every time you get more people, when you post a new video, that's going to automatically get you more views because it's going to get published to those people, which is going to make your channel more popular. And then so it's just rolling. So it took me like a year to get 1,000, but then after that, the growth path went up much more exponentially. And so it became like a fun little hobby. Like I didn't take it too serious. I never put videos up that I believe are just fluff and trying to get people to get views. I don't put misleading titles. It's just real things that I think people really need to learn. And I try really hard to stay true to that. So that way people who stick around are people who actually like the content that I'm putting out there. So it was almost an accident, me starting the YouTube channel and it becoming a thing, but it became a fun way for me to connect with people like you now.
Well, I love it. I think it's great. I think it's helpful for people to get an explanation of certain things. And you mentioned earlier that you were fairly new when you went for your certification in the career of business analysis. So did you get a lot of critique from more experienced business analysts? So what was because you said you were waiting for feedback, right, on your blog. What was that feedback?
Actually, it was mostly pretty good. Like I don't think anybody ever like directly challenged me or said, no, you're definitely wrong about that. Sometimes people added in some color that maybe I didn't have the perspective on because I didn't have the experience. But for the most part, I never felt like people were like, wow, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. It was, and I also tried not to write about things that I didn't know what I was talking about. And it was mostly just like ideas and things like that. So it actually went pretty well, I think, in terms of, especially when you consider how the internet can be. I would say my experience on the internet has been
Brutal.
very positive, and
Yeah.
I don't get rude people or anything like that. Usually just people happy that I helped them understand something that they were struggling with.
I understand. That was what I thought when you first told me you were waiting for feedback, because actually it's such a complex role that people are, and especially if they haven't been certified, there's a lot of missing gaps. I'm sure you experienced that as well. I think it's really important to learn the body of knowledge. And so I imagine if you've learned the body of knowledge more than most business analysts, even though if they have been around for a long time, they will have some intrinsic knowledge around how things work. But yeah, it does change the game if you go for some kind of certification. I
That's
definitely
very true. Yes.
Big advocate. So your YouTube channel, congratulations on all of that. It just shows how you can really grow. And what I'm getting from what you've said is that you learn by teaching almost, which is quite a particular style. Not everyone has that style, but that's another way to learn about certain content and so forth. So why did you decide on a master's? Because that's completely different to, let's say, a body of knowledge. So what was the motivation behind that?
Sure. So it basically came down to, at that point in my career, I was feeling fairly confident as a business analyst. I was certified. I knew what skills that I had that were valuable to the job. So I felt really good about it. But even then, I got my master's 4 years into my career, but I started doing the UX stuff pretty early on. But it wasn't like my job title, right? It wasn't the role. And so I always had this nagging thought of, if I go apply for a UX role, but my title has been business analyst the whole time, what credibility do I have? And later on, with more experience, I learned that there was some credibility there, and there was ways I could have kind of organized my like resume and the way I talked about the work that I did that probably would have made me just fine in the job market for
Yeah.
UX stuff. But that was a fear of mine. So in a way, I was kind of fear that if I ever left the job that I was doing, would somebody else hire me as a user experience designer given the
Mhm.
experience that I had? And so I wanted something that was definitively on my belt, that I could say, yes, I know this topic, I know this subject, and I know it well, and I've proven that I know it well, and you can't take that away from me. And certifications. And so with the BA degree, I was planning on getting like the next levels, because at the time I got the CBA, which was appropriate for my level of experience. And the plan was in a few years to get the CBAP as well. But then after I got my master's degree, and at that point I was 6 years into my career, I realized I don't necessarily have to. And because of the blog and things like the YouTube channel, I was refreshing myself on the material all the time. So I didn't feel like I
Yeah.
had lost any of the material, and I didn't need to chase the certification to force me to study. So
Mm.
then I was like, yeah, I don't need to chase it anymore. But it was really about feeling secure in the skill set that I
Yeah.
had.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense because the body of knowledge is still the body of knowledge, right? It's just the level of examination changes between
Mm.
the the certifications. So your CBAP just has harder questions really to the CCBA, but you're still learning the same body of knowledge. So there's no
That's
real
right.
difference. So if we look at, there's a lot of things happening in the market at the moment. There's things like AI. There's obviously lots of change in organizations. There's a huge push. How do you feel the roles of UX, change, analysis, etc.? What does it look like? What do you think the future looks like with those particular roles? And how is it evolving? What is the change that you see?
I think it's going to be hard to predict exactly how things will change, but it's definitely going to change. I could see that for sure. For roles like analysis and user experience design, I think there are portions of the role that AI will be able to reduce the burden on the human being, but then there's also portions of the role that kind of require that human interaction, the decision making, the kind of digging a little deeper, interviewing, really connecting with the emotional side of human beings. That part won't go away, but there are parts when you really consider any role. And what I like to think about when I think about things like AI are software like Excel, right? Before Excel, if you're a finance person or an accounting person, like it was a really tough job, because not only did you have to know the mathematics, but you had to have the organizational skills, to keep track of all that paperwork, be really organized about it, keep it in your head. So if you didn't have both of those things, then suddenly you weren't adequate for the job. But then when something like Excel came, you could have that mathematical part, and even if you're not a good book, like a paper keeper, right? Now you could do that job and still be successful. So I feel the
Mm.
same way about AI. There's portions about the BA role where sometimes they're tedious, sometimes there is a lot of heavy lifting, and it requires some personality traits that you need to be successful, and it's going to reduce that need a little bit. One of the things that I've started using recently is recording meetings and letting like AI take the notes for me. And
Yeah.
before, That was a big part of the value that I added. After a meeting, I would put together all my notes, make it nice and organized, and share it out so everybody has a better understanding than they did even during the meeting, right? Now I can spend a lot less time doing activities like that and spend time doing other types of activities. And it is changing. And the types of people who weren't super great at taking notes, now maybe they could be a little bit more successful as a business analyst because the note taking portion can be handled by AI. So I think it's definitely going to evolve. I'm excited to see the ways that it will evolve. At this point, I don't have any fear yet for my career. I'm just keeping my eyes open, making sure I'm seeing where the tides are going. So I'm learning the right things and moving in the right directions. And it's a similar story to like the UX stuff. Part of UX is creating those like final prototypes and pretty designs, but that's only like the last bit. A good portion of UX is really understanding the user base, understanding their needs, their feelings, what they're dealing with. And while AI can help you get some shortcuts to that, there's no shortcut to talking to a human being and understanding what their needs are. And so as long as humans are still using the systems, I think I'll be okay.
Yeah, I would agree with you. You spoke about the interviews. So interviewing skills is a really important skill for humans. And it's not like AI. Actually, there's some bits of AI that it's good. It can ask you the right questions, right? But just like you say, take the transcript and let AI manage kind of some of that detail, which we forget. And the fact that we don't have to take notes is even better because I remember doing this a couple of years back, actually, taking some notes. And at the time, I was using Otter to take notes and not to take notes, to get the transcript as we were recording. And what was really interesting during that time was that to actually sit back and just listen, not try capture, it was such a like a relief to go, oh, I don't need to try remember everything as it comes and try put it all. I can just listen and ask questions and not have to be on top of everything. So yeah, I agree. There's some really nice features, and as you pointed out with the Excel, that can be really helpful. Often say that any role needs to be a knowledge worker. They need to understand what's going on because AI is still not going to get it right. Are there any specific other tools that you use at the moment that is like your go-to place with AI?
No, I use ChatGPT a bit to help with things like brainstorming, coming up with ideas. Because in the current place I work, I've been there for a while, so I have a good context of the space. But I think if, for example, I was a business analyst like in a new domain and I didn't know the domain very well, I could see how something like a ChatGPT would have helped me quite a bit to help me
Mhm.
even start thinking about the right kinds of questions to answer. I actually tried it on a video to compare a project that I had previously worked on. So it wasn't something I was actively doing. It was something that was already in production years ago. And I just asked it the high level or how it would come up with the requirements for the high level project objective to see like the kinds of questions it came up with. And I would say that if I had that at that point, it definitely would have helped quite a bit to help me think through who I should be engaging, what questions I should be asking as I'm learning the domain. So I definitely think it can still be helpful to get you started, get you on the right track, start asking the right questions much sooner. And again, it takes away the necessity to have a bunch of domain knowledge right from the beginning, which is a fear of a lot of business analysts, especially if you're moving to a new domain, because you're going to be weak in that space.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, in your current role, are there any key challenges or opportunities that you see emerging?
I would say the challenges are still in a way the same. It's always for a business analyst, it's the value that you bring to the table is there's lots of solutions out there, but there's not lots of me. And by me, it could be me as an
Yeah.
individual or me, the organization that I'm a part of. We're not vanilla. We have our nuances. And so it's always about whatever is hot and new, how do we make it fit the nuances of our organization, helping people make decisions about that. So even if as you're jumping into these new things, is that a good idea for us? Is it going to meet the way we want to do business? Should we change the way we do business because of this new thing? Will that get us where we want to go? So those types of conversations, which is the bread and butter of being a business analyst, are still hold true, and I think they will for quite some time. From a UX perspective, the big change is, how do you think through these AI interfaces? Because in the past, UX was about, putting everything in the right place on the screen so people could figure out how to use the tool easily, and learn it and get whatever they're trying to get done. Now with AI, there's so many interfaces where you're just chatting, right? Whether it's verbally or you're typing. And so all the buttons and all that stuff goes away. So now you're thinking, how do I create this interaction or impose some ideas around this interaction to get the user where they want to be? So I think UX in a way is probably going to change more from the new technologies than business analysis will.
That's interesting. There's a term that they use with UX, which is information architecture sometimes. How would you explain that? Because when you speak to library services or you speak to enterprise architecture, the definitions are quite different. What does information architecture look like to a UX designer?
Yeah, so information architecture, which interestingly enough was one of the first topics that I found super interesting in UX and dug into. But information architecture is how you structure information so people can understand what's there and how to get to where they want to go. So when you look at the whole scope of an information architecture, you're talking about things like the site navigation, what's a parent of what's the hierarchy, how should you organize things. It's things like how the search works. When somebody inputs something into a search, how should you go through the data to make sure they're getting what they're expecting back? There's lots of ways to organize information, and it's important for you to organize information in a way that works for the application that you're using. And great examples of like different types of information architecture are things like Amazon.com. Amazon.com does a hybrid of hierarchical information architecture as well as matrix information architecture, because if I'm looking for a soccer shoe, for example, or a football boot, I might go to shoes, athletic, soccer. Or I might go to sports, and I might start with soccer, equipment, and eventually I get down to shoes. So you're going to have both. There's some places where it's just totally matrix. There's no parent-child structure like Wikipedia. It's just a bunch of information, but it's all linked to each other. And you can find information, and obviously in a place like that, search is really important, but there's no hierarchy. There's no structure. Whereas when you think about some of the smaller e-commerce sites, they tend to be very just strictly hierarchical. You're going down the path and you're getting to what you want. And so depending on how people need to find your information, the information architecture matters quite a bit. Over the years, it started out, the structure of that navigation was the most important. But then as searches like Google and Amazon and all of those different players started getting really good, then the focus really became on the search itself. How does the search figure out what you meant based on the words that you use? And now it's evolving again with AI to say, if I say this in this way, what do I really mean? And what should I be giving back? And how should I present that information to make sure I get what I want to get?
All right, so let's just talk about some skills and competencies for people. You've obviously built your own skill set, but for those who are looking into either UX or business analysis or a whole combination of roles, what skills and competencies do you think are really critical?
It's a good question. And I could talk all day about that. But I would say analytical thinking, to really essentially set yourself apart from somebody who's, say, not a business analyst or not functioning as a business analyst. Analytical thinking, and that's really all the parts of analytical thinking: being able to think creatively, conceptualize, visualize information. I think in my role, when somebody is a good analytical thinker, and not just being able to think about it yourself, but get other people to think analytically as well, you're essentially helping people make better decisions, more informed decisions, think through what's really happening, and you can get to the best possible output. So I think, to me at least, that's how I formulated my career and thrived in my career. When I looked at the 6 competency areas of a business analyst, I was like, I'm going to focus on that one like a lot and really try to hone in on how to develop those skills, how to demonstrate those skills so people can see it. Because if you go to anybody on the street and you say, can you think analytically? They're going to say probably, like I think I can, but they can't really define what it means to think analytically. And so again, going through the certification and really putting some boundaries on the definitions of analytical thinking so I could actually say, am I good at that skill? If not, how do I build that up? And I think when I see the difference between a BA who's good at that and a BA who's just what I called the note taker in my different types, the outcomes of those projects are very different, both in the amount of time wasted in meetings and things like that, and also the final solutions. And so analytical thinking. And then for UX, it depends on your approach to the job. UX is actually a very large field, and you could do very different things under the umbrella of UX. You could be a user researcher and never make a prototype. You could be a visual designer and never interview anybody. And so there's a broad spectrum of skills. And I would say from a UX perspective, because it's so broad, you should think about the skills that you have and the skills that you enjoy and how to pick the piece that makes the most sense to you. As an analytical thinker, I enjoyed information architecture, which is why I started in that space and why I'm really interested in knowledge graphs now. But as a business analyst, somebody who's interviewing people all the time, it was easy for me to do the user research portion and sit down with people and have a conversation with them. But if you lack any of those skill sets, there's so many other activities in the umbrella of UX design that you could find a place. Or if you want to be a full breadth professional, then you just got to look at each piece and see where you're lacking and build up that skill set.
Yeah, that's good advice because I do think if you look at the skills that you got from the Babak and you spoke about the analytical competency, I think there's quite a good strategy actually to go, what can I be really good at? Because there's quite a lot of different skills you need. Stakeholder engagement being a very important skill, of course, working with people and listening and all of those. But I think your strategy around let me be really excellent at one of them makes a lot of sense, especially if you have a team who have diverse, that they understand the role, but they have a particularly diverse skill set, what they're good at. Yeah, I like that idea. That makes sense. It's been a while since you were new to the field, both of them, but somebody who wants to enter the field, what kind of tips would you give them? Where should they start? What is the best way to get in and get started?
I would say if you could get your foot in the door in an entry level job, take it, even if you don't feel qualified. Pay attention, listen. But I would also, even if you're not going to get certified, look at material like the business analysis body of knowledge. I honestly, when I was coming out of school, the role or the job title business analyst was not something that was ever specifically called out in my curriculum. It was like things like project manager, all the database related things, developer, software engineer, but the specific term business analyst was never brought up. So when I got the job, the job rec, which they were going for university hires, so it was like a wide spread of skill sets, and they generally said software engineer, but if you looked at the whole description, it was like several different jobs on there. And so when I applied for the job, coming with an information systems degree, and I was sitting for the interview, I was talking to the person who was interviewing me, and I was like, okay, I'm looking at this big sheet of all these things on here. I know these are multiple roles. Where do you think I fit? And business analyst actually wasn't on there. But based on how I interviewed, he was like, I think you would be a good fit for a business analyst. And in my head, I was like, I don't even know what that is. But this guy who's been working and now knows who I am and my skill set thinks I'll be good at it. So who am I to say I won't? And so that interaction really drove me to jump into the career because I didn't know what it was, but somebody already believed in me. And I was like, okay, if I can get my foot in the door, this person can believe in me, sure. But then when I got there was a lot of anxiety because I was like, okay, I'm this job title now. I'm doing what people are asking me to do, but am I getting good at it? What am I trying to get good at? Like I wasn't even really sure. And so that creates like a degree of like uncertainty, right? Because sure, you've done everything your boss told you to do, but does your boss know what a business analyst should be doing? If you go to a new boss, are they going to be like, what are you doing? That's not even the right job. And so there was a lot of anxiety around that. And in my mind, even though I liked where I worked and I wasn't planning to leave, I wanted to have the confidence that if I ever wanted to leave, I wanted to be confident that if I went somewhere else and I said that I'm good at being a business analyst, it would be true and I would know that it's true. And so that kind of led me to the path of like certification. But getting that information was critical early on, because oftentimes you're working for people who weren't ever business analysts. The only thing they know are some of the activities that some of the BAs might have done when they worked with those BAs. So they might not be able to tell you specifically, and there might be activities that they might ask you to do because they need to be done. And so then you end up in a place where you're not really anything other than just an order taker of whoever is telling you to do things, versus what you really want to be when you're a business analyst, or really in any career, is when I show up there, you're not going to tell me what to do. I'm going to tell you how I'm going to provide value with the skill sets that I have that you might not even consider, because you're not a business analyst and I'm the expert at being a business analyst. And so getting in there and actually being academic about it, which if you're new in your career, you probably just finished school and you're like, oh, more school. But in truth, that's what you should be doing. You should be thinking about the skill sets that will make you valuable in whatever ways you want to evolve in your career, and be confident that those skills are the right skills that you should be gaining. Your path may not necessarily be exactly the same as mine if you want to be a more technical business analyst, or maybe go into like project management or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. You should have a clear picture of what those skills are and have your own path of getting to that beyond what your boss tells you to do.
So you mentioned a lot around the role and getting the education. I've met a lot of people who have imposter syndrome in business analysis because they haven't gone for training. And so they think they're doing things incorrectly, and they think they just have to do whatever the project manager gives them as a task to do, and mostly it's documentation, right? Note take, as you point out. And so I think it's really important that people realize that when you learn something, you actually can get rid of that imposter syndrome. It really does help at the end of the day, because otherwise it's hard work. I'm worrying.
Definitely felt like an imposter for the first couple of years in my career. Am I even good at this? Like, who am I? Should somebody else hire me? I don't even know. So yeah, getting the certification definitely helps build, or you don't have to get the certification, but getting the knowledge definitely helps build some confidence.
And as you said, even when you took your CCBA and you did your master's, you gain that confidence as you go through. So you know it's academic, and that in reality, life's going to be different, but you can make those decisions because you have more information to work with. So yeah, I agree with you. It's really useful to educate yourself as well and be responsible for your own education, not necessarily just rely on, I don't know, getting your boss to tell you that you need for training. I find that often that doesn't work. People aren't invested. If they're not invested in learning themselves intrinsically, they're not great at actually learning if they've been told, yeah, as a team, you need to learn this stuff. Yeah, so I suppose they should think of what they want to do. Question to you, and probably the hardest. If you could go back in time and give young Angelo a piece of advice, what would it be?
Good question. I would probably tell young me that I'm more capable than I think I am. I think early on there was a lot of what we were just talking about, not being certain, not being sure what path to go. But what I've learned is and a lot of that comes from, all right, there's all these, when you look out there, there's all these paths, and can I follow those paths? But you don't necessarily have to follow those paths. I think what's more important is to think about what outcome you want, and then you decide how you're going to get there. And you don't have to do it like anybody else did necessarily. And the path you choose could be even better than what people normally do, because you're thinking outside of the box and you're catering it to your own skill sets. But to have the confidence to say, if that's what you want to do, start thinking about how you want to get there instead of trying to do what everyone else is saying you should be doing. Because once I flipped that switch, my career, well, one, I was much happier in my career. I felt much better about the direction I was going, a lot less anxiety or fear about the future, because I felt like I was making my future instead of letting the future happen to me. So starting that path sooner is probably what I would say. But part of me also feels like my path has been pretty good and I like the way things turned out. for me. So maybe things happen right at the right time for me, and it ended up being just fine. Maybe I would have made different decisions in college if I was more confident. But for the most part, I would say don't change much, but be more confident and sure about yourself because you're not wrong.
That gut feeling, that's the way you need to go. All right. So, lastly, what are your plans with your YouTube channel? How can people get in touch with you? And any further tips that you want to give away, or any writing or anything that people could find out more about you?
Sure. The plan for the YouTube channel right now, I'm taking it easy. Like I said, I have two young kids and they're only going to be young for a short amount of time. So I want to give that time as much as attention as possible. So I have slowed down. But what that really means is I'm not sitting down and thinking about what content should be put out there because that's for me the hardest part, trying to decide and remember what it's like to not know what you're doing and come up with content. And so now my content is really based off of the questions people ask me. If somebody asks me a really good question and I'm like, this is a great idea for a video, that's usually how the next video gets created. I'm like, yeah, I need to put this out there. I don't have this information out there in the right way yet. So if you want to interact with me, find me on YouTube, find me on LinkedIn, ask me questions. I respond to everybody 100% because I'm a business analyst. There's not too many of us out there in the world. So it's not like I'm getting billions of messages. So I'm happy to respond to everybody, especially if you have a genuine question. And if those questions are big enough, I'm going to make a video to help you and other people who have the same question. And so definitely reach out.
Okay. And do you still have your blog?
I do still have my blog. It is the metabusinessanalyst.com. At the time when I was starting it, my thought process was I want it to be analysis about analysis, so meta business analyst. And then, of course, a decade later, Facebook decided to change their name to Meta, and everyone's, did you use that name because of that? It is not. I thought of it first. But that was the idea, to deep dive and do analysis on business analysis and think about the job. And so I cross post a lot there. I post far more on the YouTube channel, and most of the posts you'll see on the blog are just putting the video up on the blog as well as additional like text information that might help give some context around the subject. And so that's still there. That's available. I do have a few courses out there if you really want to get an in-depth thought. Most of my courses are purely about the competencies of business analysis. So it's usually not about everything in the Babok, but to help people think through how to build their skills in the competencies if you feel like you need that. But I would say that my YouTube channel covers a lot of that stuff as well. I also offer coaching as well. Coaching is difficult because, like I said, my time is limited. So I actually don't push people towards the coaching. But if you feel like you really need it, it's usually people who are not starting in their careers. They're usually people who are a little bit further along in their careers and they've landed themselves in a more senior BA position. And now they're afraid and not sure that they know the right things to be doing. And so if you're in that position and you've landed the job and you're concerned that you're maybe not going in the right directions, that's available for you as well. But that coaching is not really intended for like beginners starting their careers.
Yeah. Yeah, it is quite different between somebody who just wants to know how to be a BA versus someone wants to know how to solve specific problems. That's quite different. So yeah, I hear you. Anyway, Angelo, thank you. It's been awesome. Thank you for your videos. They are
Thanks for having me.
fantastic. Yeah. Good luck with being a young dad or young children, or I don't know how people would say it, but good luck with your kids and your career and all the work that you're doing for the community. So thank you very much for your contribution. That's been awesome.
Thank you. And thanks for having me. It was a good interview.